Futurist Jeremy Nulik, next on City Corner. I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome to City Corner. Well, we have an interesting show for you today, one that I hope opens your mind to a new way of thinking, a new way of making decisions, whether that's in business or in your personal life. I'm joined by Bigwidesky's Jeremy Nulik. He is a futurist. And yes, you heard me correctly when I said the word futurist. He is a futurist, and we're going to learn all about what that means today, what it means to think like a futurist, the art of strategic foresight thinking. I will note that in my research, I have read that this is considered right now one of the coolest jobs, and some have even said the most important role in society right now. So here we go, not too much to live up to, Jeremy, right? But we're gonna dig into more today with Jeremy. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I had no idea it was so cool.
I
really didn't know.
I did my research and I came across some articles and they said that being a futurist today, besides being one of the coolest jobs, yes, was one considered the most important role in society. But I don't know, you used to work in media, you know how that goes, right?
I do know how it goes. Yeah. And you can write just about anything if you have the assignment. That's right.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's start things off. I wanted to dig into this because I find this really interesting. And I think I call it now, we're in this age of sort of master classes and podcasts where there's a lot out here about new ways of thinking, new ways of accomplishing goals, both on a business side and on a personal side. So we're going to have to start on the most the simplest terms, and then we'll kind of grow from there.
Sounds good.
So futurist, what is a futurist?
A futurist is a person who practices strategic foresight. Someone who is curious about change, and someone who is compelled to examine the rate of change and to take a look at the plausibility of possible futures where we may find ourselves. So some of what's required is to just understand some basics about the future, how people typically project into the future, and what our present moment usually entails. So us sitting here right now, you and I, your mind right now and mine are peppered with images of possible futures that could exist for how this interview will go, for how your evening will be when you get back home with your kids and such. And all of that is part of your present moment. And so the present moment is full of possible futures, of possible images of the future. And those images are actually the ones that create our decision making. Those images that we cultivate, that we nurture, are the ones that typically are the ones that lead to us making decisions about what we want to do in this present moment. And so what a futurist does for either an individual, for organizations, for communities, is a futurist says, both what are those images collectively of a group, what kind of images are they nurturing, cultivating, and also what's out there in the world right now? What are the signals of possible change that could impinge upon those images, that could color those images, that might change or inspire different images for people as they make decisions in their present day? So it's a way to live inspired and to cultivate a sense of here's how change is coming from an inbound perspective, so from signals or from disruption. And here is the changes that I would like to make and I foresee. And somewhere in the middle of that is where you negotiate the kinds of decisions you want to make.
Right. And so as I'm listening to what you're saying, it seems like a lot of thought has to be applied to think in the art of thinking like a futurist or strategic foresight. You have to examine criteria. So when you were giving the example of this interview, prepping for this interview, I had applied time, or when I think about what I'm going to have for dinner. But some of that might just be immediate. If you are starting to, for somebody listening to this who might run their own business at home, or anyone just listening, if they want to apply it to their day-to-day life, when you are, based on what you were just saying, you then, it sounds like, need to really think and organize what you're sort of viewing, if you will, that might be in the future. You have to study it. You have to develop that data. No?
Sure. I guess another way to answer it, so to get to what you're saying too, is a futurist is someone who is curious about just getting to know the possible futures. And so and it's also someone who, like, as you were just saying, in terms of time horizon, it goes further than just what are we going to do this evening? Typically what we're concerned with as futurists are what you would call like low time preference or long-term futures. So 10-year horizons, 20-year horizons. What kind of future might we be in?
Yeah.
And who might we be in those futures is the kind of question that a futurist would ask. So if you're at home and you own a business, it would be like, and if you close your eyes and you add a 1 to the tens column of your age, and you think about what might my business be like if you're in a nonprofit, what might my community be like? What would be the nature of that community? Who would I be in that future? And then you can begin to make decisions today to live in a way that is inspired by that image.
I see.
And so, that is a sort of an encapsulation of futures thinking. If anything, it was inspired, at least for me, by this. What I kept running into as someone who, and you mentioned this just briefly, but like coming from creative sort of art, sort of background, journalism, or trying to build stories, or trying to write something interesting or perform something interesting. The pressure to do this with so many like short-term goals, the pressure that you get under, especially as a business, as a community, we have to make our quarterly goal. We have to make X amount of tickets need to be sold to this event next week. There's all these urgent and short-term, sort of pressures. And what that leads to is a series of decisions that you're backed into that don't necessarily ladder to any ultimate sort of image of the future that is inspired, And so what I was inspired by with futures thinking was let us use our images from the future to create meaning over the decisions we're making today. So as opposed to just making the decision to get the short-term impact that we're going for, why don't we live in a way that's inspired by who we want to be in 10 years from now.
When you and I were talking before the interview, I was telling you that I had been listening to a podcast, and there was a neuroscientist in this interview, and she was saying how she was really into indigenous culture wisdom.
Yes.
And so she was talking about First Nations and talking about indigenous cultures who used to make decisions based on what the impact would be for 7 generations in the future. And it stuck with me because I thought, wow, what if everyone sort of approached their decision making? In business, it's hard because you do have to end year-end revenue, year-end goals. But if we gave more thought to what does the impact of what we're doing now have for 7 generations, and it stuck with me. And then knowing the work that you do, it's like that overlap kept happening. So, whoever's watching this at home, whether again just individuals on the basis, how can you? Let's start on the basic level, on an individual level, one-on-one. What would you say to someone? Just kind of that comment I made about referencing indigenous cultures making decisions. Practice of that for 7 generations in the future. What would you say to someone is a simple thing that they can do, a first action, to start thinking with strategic foresight in their individual life? And then we'll kind of expand to business.
Sure. No, I mean, there's any number of things. And first of all, also, I should say, strategic foresight as a practice area is an emerging one. It's been around for some time now, but and there are schools that you can go to and get degreed in this program. It's completely legit. University of Houston and some others.
So that's what you're, for your background, you're training.
Right, exactly. But there is an entire section of foresight, of strategic foresight community all around indigenous, thinking, wisdom from traditions, and a lot of it just comes down to be honest, human development. Like this was embedded in a lot of our cultures and a lot of our civilizations, this kind of thinking. But to answer your question, if you're at home and you're like, how can I embrace some thinking like this? The questions to sit with would be things about, in 50 years from now, or, in decades from now. And let's say maybe even for you and I, like in 50 years from now, I'm likely no longer on the planet. So, the impact I want to have or the legacy I want to leave behind, what is it that I would like, what kind of world would I like to leave behind and would I want to create and make more possible? Not necessarily do I want to rest or somehow manipulate to make it something, but what kind of world would I like to build that I could make something more possible? A world where, this happens often when we talk to groups about their vision statements, and I know we're going to get into maybe what we do for for consulting with people. But, one of the challenges that you run into when you start doing this, and you confront this directly, which is prompted by your question, is like, it needs to be a canvas that's bigger than you, right? Yeah. And so when you begin that process and you start thinking, well, if I'm not even getting the credit, if it's not even about me, what kind of thing would I like to make more possible for the next generation of people who may be passionate about the same things I am? What kind of pathways do I want to create for those people? What could I make more possible? And so that's very much more like a positive, sort of statement about your vision for the world. And you can start there.
And not to cut you off too, I want to make sure, because we lined up a lot of you had shared with me this graphic, and it's almost like an animated graphic. I think you guys probably use it in some of your work. We do. And so is this supposed to sort of help you, one, when you're working with your clients? And you just explained on an individual level, but as we segue into organizations and businesses and we can take a look at it, is this sort of a graphic to help people think? Tell me what this is when we, it's a way to help think about.
So strategic foresight, like I was saying, it is a method that's systematic. It's a methodology that gets at these questions that we're talking about that otherwise seam possibly like esoteric or strange. Exactly. Like who do I want to be? What are you talking about? The method is broken into some steps, and the first being mapping the domain. So what is the thing we're futuring? So that first part of the graphic is like, let's get an idea of the container around the thing that we're futuring. Is it a community? If it is a community, what are the things that are adjacent to that community? Often what happens that you'll see that has occurred if you look at the past is the things that have had the deepest impact on a community, on a business, aren't necessarily things that are directly within its domain. It's something from on the outside that suddenly emerged that took over. So if you think about things like the retail industry, or if you think about, what we've known even like during the pandemic, that gave rise to a lot of signals that were already in the market that just suddenly became real to everyone. So when you map a domain, you take a look at the whole thing. So that's that first part of the graphic. Then what you do as futurists is you typically will scan for signals. So that's that eyeball part of it. So you're looking around and you're trying to find what are quiet, discrete, interesting, not yet trends or driving trends, but something that if it were to become a trend would have a deep impact on the direction of the thing you're futuring.
Well, we've got, you sent over another example, and we're going to show it for a client of yours. And I think it's you called it a future artifact?
It's an artifact from the future.
Artifact from the future. So we're going to take a look at that in our second segment. Before we go to break, I'm going to put up two graphics for you, because we're talking about a lot here. And if you want to reach out to Jeremy and Bigwidesky and learn more about the work that they're doing, we've got that information for you on the screen. Bigwidesky. It's here locally in St. Louis, but they work with clients all over the country, really. But head to bigwidesky.com. And the second graphic is Jeremy actually hosts virtual workshops. So you can sort of get what I'm getting here one-on-one in the studio. You can get this virtually, and again, more information about when those are happening throughout 2024 on the website. But don't go anywhere. We've got a lot more to discuss and look at, and there's just a lot more. There's a lot more, and I wish we had more time. But stay with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Residents love the St. Louis Zoo because it's free. There's a train, a carousel, opportunities to make new friends, and plenty of fun learning experiences with the animals 363 days a year. So come and experience St. Louis.
I'm your retirement fear, but don't be scared. You're still in pretirement.
Does that mean I have more time to plan?
Precisely. This is pretirement.org.
This isn't scary. I'm doing it.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome back to City Corner. Today, I'm joined by Jeremy Nulik. He is a futurist at Bigwidesky, a human, I should say this, what was it? I was going to say before, a consulting group, but you actually, what's the correct, human business consulting?
Human
right?
business consultancy is what we say.
Yeah, so no, I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
And
right.
even with the title, I know I'm like, I don't want to just call it a consulting group, but you are a consulting group. But
Sure.
no, we're talking about what it means to be a futurist
Yes.
and sort of applying the strategic foresight, this art of strategic foresight, both in your life as well as to business. So I want to get into something that you provided for us, and you can maybe set it up. This is a video that you did, and we're just going to run it as we talk and kind of explain more. You said, call this an artifact from the future.
That's correct.
This is for a client of yours. Tell us what we're looking at as it kind of runs.
Well, we had a client that was facing change, that was facing some deep change in terms of the meaning of how they would appeal to their audiences, what their position was in the market and things like this. And so one of the ways that we help to provoke, like that's the point of an artifact from the future, is to provoke people into conversations that are new, that are nuanced, that maybe they aren't having, that are, just more sort of meaning-based and difficult than if you just went in with inquiry and said, what do you guys think about the future of your company? And you'd just get a whole bunch of answers that, are the things that people think that they're supposed to say. But what this did is we said, hey, we took a look. Strategic foresight is both an art, but it's also a rigorous, there's some rigor involved. There's research. And so what we did is we researched their domain, and within their domain, there was a bunch of signals that had to do with the ability to create bioreactors that would give outputs of what you would normally get from production agriculture. So our client was in production agriculture. And so what we presented them with was a corporate statement from the future, from 10 years in the future, of an organization that was actually making an announcement that they were producing all of the outputs necessary without ever having to plant anything, without having to engage in any production agriculture. And so what this did was it provoked a conversation within that group, not necessarily of, do you think this is great or not? What's your opinion of it? What's your judgment? It was more like, this is the future in which you find yourself, which is the point of an artifact. And so therefore, if this were your future, if this were the case, who would you be in that future? What would you do?
That's interesting.
And then there is a series of activations through which they interpret that, both positive and negative imagination around it. And then it's a narrative-based sort of game as well. So they build on each other's narratives about the possible futures. And what we begin to do is then we look for signals within their answers. So we look for what are some of the trends that we can see of the way that they're interpreting a future artifact. Essentially, the whole gambit here is that we're using the future as a canvas because it's a place that is not yet defined.
Right.
It's a place that no one can say that they own. It's not it's a place that you can't, with some sort of positivist data or something like this, say it can't be. Well, any of them could be. And so what we're saying is we're going to use this one to provoke in a useful way, a conversation this organization would need to have to make a strategic plan to move forward. In an anti-fragile way, in a way that is conscious of the fact that there's inbound change occurring in their area, in their domain, and so that's what it led to, was an inspired conversation.
Sure.
A quick example that I'd love to give.
And while
you.
you're talking too, I want to just have people for visuals. We've got, because when you're talking about this, you are actually hosting, and we can run some B-roll of this with your clients. You're coming and you're running, it sounds like these kind of sessions where people come and they meet or brainstorming. And so there's like a whole process, the methodology to this. This is you.
Oh, me
presenting,
with a lot more hair barking in front of a room.
But we're just going to run this as you talk, but please, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but go ahead.
Well, an example of this also, there was a group, this is 2014, so some time ago, like over 10 years ago. Just over 10 years ago, we were doing this work actually here in St. Louis with a group of nonprofits that were all responsible for the economic development of our region. And one of the things that we love to do when we play some sort of a foresight activation or a foresight game with people to activate their imagination, to provoke them, is one of the things that's the most fun to do is to give people everything they say that they want and then see what happens. So one of the activation we did said, hey, it's Apple, it's 2024, and Apple has decided to locate its second headquarters in St. Louis. And we created then all of the creative necessary, like here's where their campus would be, here's what it would look like here in St. Louis, here's all of that sort of accoutrement that would surround all of it. And so then we had them play the same sort of game. And like I said, we look for signals. And one of the signals we found when we did that work amongst this group, again, of some nonprofits all responsible for economic development. Now, if Apple relocated to St. Louis, that's like perfect. That would be like the biggest win ever. But what was amazing is the preponderance of visions, the preponderance of responses. Most of the responses were actually negative. They were like, well, this might break. And what about that? And oh my goodness, what about this, right? Isn't that interesting? One of the things we found, though, is that one of the signals was there exists within St. Louis an appetite for civil unrest because of race, gentrification, lack of trust kind of issues. We presented the outcomes of this report toward the end of July in 2014. And then a couple weeks later, Michael Brown was killed.
Really?
And this group came back to us and they were like, oh my goodness, like you guys you told us the future or something. And that was the beautiful moment because we could say like, well, no, you knew this.
Yeah.
And the challenge though, and the thing that's challenging in general about when you're dealing with change and when you're dealing with trying to make a difference in a community, it's difficult to find unless you're doing something like Foresight, unless you're doing something where you're gathering people to have conversations like this. What other meeting or what other venue would take place where you could just walk in and go, hey guys, race, gentrification, anybody talking about this for economic development? Because I mean, at the time, most of those folks weren't thinking this way. And it took something like the tragedy we faced as a community for it to bring to the fore for most people. But that was already there. People already knew.
Right. Well, it's interesting because when we were speaking, ahead of time and off camera, you were telling me, and if you want to allude to this, that that there's the origins of this in terms of applying the strategic foresight from the Department of Defense. And I think I was even saying that, we were talking about like Cold War and that, the USSR and Soviet Union was like, had academics studying American culture so that they could project like down the road, decades down the road, like how there might be civil unrest, right? Or what might lead to that within this country, people studying American sort of habits and trends. But talk about a little bit of the origins of that. And then I wanted, before, of course, we wrap the segment, be sure to plug a little bit for the company and show some of that. But
sure.
Just answer it about
just
the
answer,
Department of Defense.
All right. Well, so, the RAND Corporation, part of the structure for what we understand today as strategic foresight comes from the work from the RAND Corporation and, at least the part of it that I've studied. It's borrowing, strategic foresight is still an emerging field, and so it's borrowing from a good number of interdisciplinary fields. Some people who are within the field, I should also just say, are study something called Design Futures, which actually leads with the artifacts from the future. So instead of doing the process through which having the sort of strategic foresight background, you lead with an artifact and you allow for that to provoke new answers from people. So there's any number of ways that you can go about the method. But the RAND Corporation is responsible to some degree for coming up with the sort of the main components of what we understand to be strategic foresight today. Because at the time we had to face an enemy that didn't, as a country, we were looking to try to figure out how we face an enemy that just wasn't operating in the same manner, and there was so much uncertainty, and that's what they were dealing with. The uncertainties are so high, so there's no way that you can know. So no data from the past is going to tell you how they behave in the future. If anything, that's really the key insight that they gave was that, and something that I think is still, it's becoming even more evident today. If you just look around today. The level of times that you see the words uncertainty, unprecedented, unimaginable, those words are in headlines more often now than they've ever been. In fact, the word unprecedented in particular is so precedented now because it's just like we find ourselves in times that just seem strange, right? And so with such high levels of uncertainty, no data from your past is going to tell you how to behave in the future. So you have to get to know your future, so that is part of the process of doing it.
Before we wrap things up, I want to make sure we come to this because we've got some images from you at the office and just your team, and just in general, I want to make sure we cover for Bigwidesky. So as we talked about, a consultancy group. I love the human business consulting, and I think I had said to you, did your job did it always start off this way? But just give us an oversight too of like what it is that you're doing, because you have clients coming to you from all over the country, really with knowing that you are a futurist, but they're coming to you for different services. Is this kind of part and parcel of pretty much everything that the
Sure.
agency is doing?
Well, Big Wide Sky, nearly everything we do is informed, inspired by our foresight understanding, and it is animated and inspired by it. We do have some clients that come to us specifically for, hey, we're trying to find a new way into having a conversation about a strategic plan, and we need to rethink it, because what we found is when we go to do our strategic plan every year, we take last year's and we zhuzh it up a bit and we change some of the numbers, and that's our new strategic plan. And so, and that's a really common practice, and no one should feel
it's like every
at all.
5 years.
Yeah,
thing,
I mean,
right?
this is exactly it's just a cycle, and that's a really common. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it sounds like best practices because you're focused on your core competencies. But what it doesn't take into account is what might be inspired about the collective images of the future that the group that is making that strategic plan have, and what inbound change, what things are possible that are out there that we're just not considering. What adjacencies might there be where we could take some advantage? And so that's another reason people come to us. But what ends up usually happening is people have an experience with us that's not unlike if you've seen or if you've been to see a really inspired or a good therapist or something, right? Like the problem you come to your therapist with is not usually your problem.
Right.
And so there's usually a presenting issue, and then there's like a core issue, something underneath that's more substantive, that's actually the center of the problem. And what foresight will do, because it's a canvas that's safe, because it's the future, what you begin to do is point to the things that matter to you the most, which also happen to be the challenges you have that matter to you the most. But rather than sort of being told that's what your problem is, you get to tell yourself. You get to go through a process by which you can reveal to yourself, well, this is our main challenge.
Yes.
Actually, if we were to solve this would fundamentally shift our understanding of how we need to make our strategic plan.
No, that's a great way to end it. I had this question that I wanted to ask you for a futurist. What does a futurist future look like that I don't? I wanted to get to that question, but we don't have time for it. So the next
Way
time.
to key it up. Right. We'll have to do part
Should
2.
have started with
Oh,
that
shoot.
one. No, but this is really interesting. And I think for even folks at home, a lot to take in and a lot to learn. But I encourage people to head to Bigwidesky's website. You can learn a lot more about their work. It obviously applies to business. Your clients are a business. So I think kind of have to extrapolate a little bit for the processing on an individual level. But I do think it introduces a new way of thinking. And Jeremy's alluded to some of that today. But head to bigwidesky.com to learn more about what they do. And then there's these upcoming throughout the year virtual workshops that Jeremy's leading on behalf of Big Wide Sky, talking about strategic foresight and some of the topics. Just a little bit of what we covered today.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. I mean, I always say I wish I had more time, and the show already is like 30 minutes. But thank you so much for being here and just giving us a little slice, a little glimpse at this new way of thinking.
Thanks for having me. We'll have to do it in the future.
Yes.
All right.
At the future and the future, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, and thank you at home for watching, and keep it right here on STL TV. Experience St. Louis. Thank you.